She wiped the table slowly, one hand on her belly, trying not to wobble. The moment she paused to breathe, a voice snapped, "You're useless." Within seconds, 2 guards grabbed her arms. "Get this pregnant girl out of here," someone ordered. She stumbled, clutching her stomach, eyes wide with fear. They dragged her toward the door as whispers filled the room. Disgust, judgment, laughter. No one asked her name. No one cared why she was there. She was just the maid. Just another burden. But behind the noise, footsteps echoed, slow, steady, powerful. Then came the voice. Calm, clear, commanding. "Stop. That's my baby." The room fell into silence. Heads turned, mouths dropped. And there he was, impeccably dressed, eyes locked on her, walking through the crowd like he owned the ground beneath him. Because he did. The most powerful man in the city wasn't there for a meeting. He was there for her. And the woman they had dragged like nothing? She was carrying the one life he valued more than all his billions. Welcome to Heroes Unheard. Before we continue this emotional story, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We're growing every day, and I sincerely thank you for being a part of it. The Sterling Foundation's annual charity gala was the most exclusive social event of the year. Held in the grand ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel, where 500 of the region's wealthiest and most influential people gathered to raise money for causes that allowed them to feel virtuous while networking with others who could advance their interests. The evening represented the pinnacle of high society, where attendees wore designer gowns that cost more than most people earned in months and jewelry that required private security details. Rosa Martinez had been working for the Sterling family for 8 months, hired as part of the household staff that maintained their primary residence and managed the complex logistics of their social obligations. She was 22 years old and had immigrated from El Salvador 3 years earlier, sending most of her earnings back to her family while saving what little she could for the uncertain future that awaited all undocumented workers in a country where their legal status could change without warning. The job with the Sterling family had been a blessing, offering steady work with employers who treated their staff professionally and paid wages that were generous by industry standards. Mrs. Victoria Sterling was demanding but fair, expecting excellence but providing clear direction and reasonable working conditions for the team of housekeepers, gardeners, and support staff who maintained their estate. Rosa's responsibilities included cleaning the family's numerous guest rooms, organizing Mrs. Sterling's extensive wardrobe, and helping with event preparation during the busy social season when the Sterling house hosted dinners and fundraisers that brought together the city's power elite. She was good at her work, taking pride in maintaining standards that reflected well on her employers while building a reputation for reliability that might lead to better opportunities in the future. What the Sterling family didn't know was that Rosa had been attending night school, studying English and business administration with the goal of eventually starting her own cleaning service that would provide employment for other immigrant women who faced the same challenges she had overcome. She had been carefully saving money and building the knowledge base that would allow her to become an entrepreneur rather than remaining an employee throughout her working life. Rosa's relationship with David Sterling, the family's eldest son, had developed gradually over the months she had worked in their house. David was 28 years old and managed one of his family's charitable foundations, work that brought him into regular contact with community organizations and social service agencies that served the city's most vulnerable populations. Unlike many wealthy young men who might have treated household staff as invisible or interchangeable, David had always been courteous to Rosa, asking about her family and showing genuine interest in her goals for the future. Their conversations had begun casually but had evolved into something deeper as they discovered shared concerns about social justice and community development. The romantic relationship that developed between them was complicated by the vast differences in their social and economic positions, differences that were impossible to ignore despite their genuine feelings for each other. David understood that his family and social circle would never accept Rosa as an appropriate partner, while Rosa knew that their relationship could cost her both her job and her immigration status if it became public knowledge. They had tried to maintain appropriate boundaries while David was living in his family's house, but their connection had proven stronger than their ability to resist it. When Rosa discovered she was pregnant, both of them had faced impossible choices about how to handle a situation that threatened to destroy both of their futures while potentially creating scandal for the Sterling family. David had wanted to marry Rosa immediately, regardless of the social consequences, But Rosa had insisted that he needed to consider the impact on his career and his family's reputation before making decisions that couldn't be undone. She had agreed to continue working for the Sterling family while they figured out how to navigate the complex personal and social challenges that their relationship presented. The charity gala had been planned for months, with every detail designed to impress the influential guests whose continued support was essential for the Sterling Foundation's various philanthropic initiatives. The hotel ballroom had been transformed into something resembling a fairy tale, with crystal chandeliers, elaborate floral arrangements, and decorative lighting that made the space feel magical rather than merely expensive. Rosa had been assigned to work the event as part of the catering support staff, helping to coordinate the complex logistics of serving a 7-course meal to 500 guests while maintaining the seamless elegance that high-society events demanded. Her pregnancy was now 5 months along, showing enough that she had needed to be careful about her uniform selection, but not obvious enough to attract unwanted attention from guests or supervisors. The work was physically demanding, requiring long hours on her feet and constant movement between the kitchen and the dining areas. But Rosa had managed to perform her duties efficiently while avoiding any situations that might reveal her condition to people who might ask uncomfortable questions. David had been circulating among the guests as expected, representing the family at their most important social event while maintaining the professional demeanor that his position required. But throughout the evening, he had been acutely aware of Rosa's presence, concerned about her well-being while frustrated by the need to pretend they were nothing more than employer and employee. The evening had proceeded smoothly until the auction portion of the program, when wealthy guests bid on luxury items and exotic travel packages while competing to demonstrate their generosity and social status. Rosa had been clearing tables in the main dining area when she began to feel dizzy, the combination of pregnancy symptoms and physical exertion affecting her more than she had anticipated. She had tried to step aside quietly to rest for a moment, but her supervisor, a stern woman named Margaret Walsh who managed catering operations for the hotel, had noticed Rosa's distress and immediately assumed the worst about her condition and her professionalism. "Rosa, what's wrong with you?" Margaret demanded loudly enough to attract attention from nearby guests who turned to see what was causing the commotion. "I'm fine," Rosa replied quietly, trying to minimize the disruption while fighting off a wave of nausea that was making it difficult to remain standing. But Margaret had noticed Rosa's condition earlier in the evening and had been looking for an excuse to address what she saw as an inappropriate situation for a catering event of this importance. "You're clearly not fine," Margaret said with the kind of authority that came from years of managing hospitality events. "And I can see that you're pregnant. You shouldn't be working an event like this in your condition." The word pregnant seemed to echo through the nearby area, causing conversations to pause as guests and staff members turned to observe what was obviously becoming a confrontational situation. Rosa felt her face burning with embarrassment as she realized that her carefully guarded secret was being revealed in the worst possible way. "Please," Rosa said quietly, "I can do my job. I just needed a moment to rest." "Absolutely not," Margaret replied with finality. "Pregnant women have no business working events like this. You're a liability to the hotel and a distraction for our guests." Several of the wealthy women attending the gala had gathered to watch the confrontation with the kind of morbid curiosity that affluent people often display when witnessing the struggles of working-class individuals. Their expressions mixed disapproval with entertainment, understanding that they were watching someone's professional humiliation unfold in real time. "This is exactly why we don't hire people in her condition," one of them whispered loudly enough for Rosa to hear. "They can't handle the demands of proper service. It's unprofessional to have pregnant staff at an event like this," another added with the authoritative tone of someone who had never worked a day in food service. "What kind of message does that send about the hotel's standards?" Margaret nodded approvingly at the support she was receiving from the hotel's most important guests, feeling validated in her decision to make an example of Rosa in front of an audience that appreciated strong management decisions. "You need to leave immediately," Margaret told Rosa with cold finality. "Collect your things and exit through the service entrance. Your employment with this catering company is terminated effective immediately." Rosa felt the words hit her like physical blows, understanding that she was losing not just her job for the evening but her entire source of income, at a time when she most needed financial stability. Around her, the affluent guests were watching her humiliation with the detached interest of people observing entertainment that didn't affect their own lives. "Please don't do this," Rosa said with quiet dignity, trying to appeal to whatever compassion might exist in the situation. "I need this job. I haven't done anything wrong." But Margaret was already signaling to the hotel's security staff, who approached Rosa with the efficient professionalism of people who were accustomed to removing unwanted individuals from exclusive events. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," one of the security guards said, taking Rosa's arm with firm but not violent pressure. As they began to escort her toward the service exit, Rosa caught sight of David across the ballroom, engaged in conversation with a group of potential donors who were discussing their commitment to supporting educational programs for underprivileged children. He hadn't noticed the commotion that was taking place on the other side of the room, and Rosa's heart broke as she realized that her removal from the event would likely happen without his knowledge. The security guards increased their pace as they approached the service corridor, eager to resolve the situation quickly and discreetly so that the evening's festivities could continue without further disruption. Behind them, Margaret was already returning to her supervisory duties, satisfied that she had handled a problematic situation efficiently. But as they reached the doorway that led to the service areas, Rosa stumbled slightly, her pregnancy making it difficult to keep up with the security guard's pace while maintaining her balance. The stumble was minor, but it was enough to cause her to cry out softly as she protected her belly from potential harm. The sound carried across the ballroom's marble floors and caught David's attention in a way that made him turn immediately toward the source of distress, understanding instinctively that something was wrong even before he could see what was happening. David Sterling's voice cut through the elegant chatter of the charity gala like a blade, carrying across the marble floors with an authority that made every conversation in the ballroom pause immediately. "Stop." The single word carried the weight of generations of social power, spoken by someone who had never doubted his right to command attention and obedience in any room he entered. The security guards escorting Rosa toward the service exit halted immediately, recognizing the voice of someone whose displeasure could end their careers with a single phone call. "That's my baby." The second statement hit the ballroom like a physical force, transforming the atmosphere from elegant entertainment to shocked silence as 500 of the city's most influential people tried to process what they had just heard. David Sterling, heir to one of the largest fortunes in the region, had just publicly claimed paternity of the child being carried by a woman who was being removed from the event for being an inappropriate presence at a high society gathering. David walked across the ballroom floor with purposeful strides, his formal evening wear and confident bearing making it clear that he belonged in this environment in ways that Rosa never could. But his destination and his words were redefining every assumption about appropriate relationships and social boundaries. Margaret Walsh stood frozen near the service entrance, her face cycling through confusion, horror, and the dawning realization that she had just publicly humiliated the pregnant girlfriend of the most powerful young man in the city. Around her, the catering staff who had been watching Rosa's removal with professional detachment suddenly understood that they were witnessing a scandal that would be talked about for years. The wealthy guests who had been enjoying Rosa's humiliation just moments before were now staring at David with expressions that mixed shock with calculation, trying to understand how this revelation would affect their own social standing and business relationships with the Sterling family. Rosa felt the security guards release her arms as David approached, their professional training telling them to defer to someone with obvious authority while their personal instincts warned them that they had become unwitting participants in a situation that was spiraling beyond their control. "David," Rosa whispered as he reached her side, her voice carrying relief, fear, and love in equal measure. David took her hands gently, his touch conveying reassurance and protection while his eyes remained fixed on her face with an intensity that made it clear to everyone watching that this wasn't a casual relationship or a momentary indiscretion, but something deeper and more significant. "Are you all right?" David asked quietly, his voice carrying genuine concern about her physical and emotional well-being. Rosa nodded, still trying to process the fact that David had just sacrificed his social standing and family relationships to publicly acknowledge their relationship and defend her dignity in front of an audience that would judge them both harshly for what they had witnessed. Margaret Walsh approached them with obvious nervousness, understanding that she needed to attempt some kind of damage control while having no idea how to address a situation that had moved far beyond the scope of normal hospitality management. "Mr. Sterling," Margaret said with forced professionalism, "I had no idea that this woman was, that you and she were." "Rosa is the mother of my child," David said clearly, his voice carrying throughout the ballroom and ensuring that no one could claim they hadn't heard or understood his declaration. "She's also the woman I love and intend to marry." The second revelation hit the assembled crowd with even greater force than the first. Acknowledging paternity might have been explained away as a momentary lapse in judgment, But announcing marriage intentions transformed the situation from a scandal into a fundamental challenge to the social order that governed their exclusive world. Mrs. Victoria Sterling, David's mother, had been seated at the head table when the commotion began, but she was now standing with the rigid posture of someone whose carefully constructed social world was collapsing around her. Her face showed a mixture of shock, disappointment, and the beginning of strategic calculation about how to manage a crisis that threatened the family's reputation and social standing. "David," she called out with the authoritative tone that had commanded his obedience throughout his childhood, "I think we need to discuss this privately." But David remained focused on Rosa, understanding that any private discussion would involve pressure to abandon his relationship and deny his responsibilities as a father. He had spent months agonizing over how to balance his love for Rosa with his obligations to his family, but seeing her humiliated and threatened had clarified his priorities in ways that no amount of deliberation could have achieved. "There's nothing to discuss privately," David replied, his voice carrying across the ballroom with the confidence of someone who had made his choice and was prepared to accept its consequences. "Rosa and I are going to be married, and we're going to raise our child together. Anyone who has a problem with that will need to adjust their expectations." The ultimatum was clear and uncompromising, forcing everyone present to choose between accepting David's relationship or forfeiting their connection to one of the city's most influential families. It was a power play that only someone with David's social and economic advantages could attempt. But it was also a genuine expression of love and commitment that transcended the calculated relationships that typically defined high society interactions. Margaret Walsh realized that her attempt to remove Rosa from the event had created exactly the kind of public spectacle that luxury hotels were designed to prevent, and that her actions had resulted in the humiliation of someone who was apparently connected to the Sterling family in the most intimate possible way. "Mr. Sterling, I sincerely apologize," Margaret said with obvious desperation. "If I had known about your relationship, I never would have." "You never would have what?" David interrupted, his voice taking on an edge that made everyone understand he was genuinely angry rather than merely disappointed. "You never would have treated a pregnant woman with disrespect? You never would have assumed that someone's employment status determined their human worth? You never would have provided entertainment for wealthy guests who enjoyed watching a vulnerable person being humiliated?" The questions hung in the air like accusations, forcing Margaret and everyone else present to confront the reality that Rosa's treatment had been wrong regardless of her relationship to David. That dignity should have been afforded to her because she was a human being rather than because she was connected to a powerful family. David looked around the ballroom at the faces staring back at him, taking in the mixture of shock, disapproval, curiosity, and calculation that characterized the crowd's response to his announcement. "I want everyone here to understand something," David said, his voice carrying the authority that came from a lifetime of social privilege but also the moral clarity that came from having his values tested in a moment of crisis. "Rosa Martinez is not just the mother of my child. She's one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. She's working 2 jobs while attending night school, sending money to support her family in El Salvador, and building a business plan that will create employment opportunities for other immigrant women." He gestured toward the assembled crowd of wealthy philanthropists who spent their evenings raising money for causes that allowed them to feel virtuous about their privilege. "She's doing more to improve this community than most of the people in this room, despite having a fraction of the resources that you take for granted. And if you can't respect her for her character and her contributions, then you damn well better respect her as my fiancée and the future mother of my children." The declaration was a direct challenge to the social hierarchy that governed their world, demanding that people who had built their identities around exclusivity and inherited advantage acknowledge the worth of someone who had been excluded from their circles based on circumstances beyond her control. Victoria Sterling approached her son with the careful movements of someone trying to prevent a bad situation from becoming catastrophic, understanding that every word spoken in front of this audience would be repeated and analyzed throughout their social circle for months to come. "David, sweetheart," she said with forced calm, "perhaps we could continue this conversation in a more private setting where we can discuss the implications of what you're saying." But Rosa stepped forward before David could respond, understanding that she needed to speak for herself rather than allowing others to make decisions about her future without her participation. "Mrs. Sterling," Rosa said with quiet dignity, "I understand that our relationship creates complications for your family. I never intended for that to happen. But I love your son, and I'm carrying his child, and I won't apologize for either of those things." She looked around the ballroom at the faces staring back at her, taking in the mixture of curiosity, judgment, and surprise that characterized the crowd's response to hearing her speak as an equal participant in the conversation rather than as a problem to be solved. I know that many of you think I'm not good enough for David because of where I come from or what kind of work I do, Rosa continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. But I also know that David thinks I'm good enough, and our child will think I'm good enough, and at the end of the day, those are the only opinions that matter to me. The statement was delivered with such simple honesty and quiet strength that it seemed to shift the atmosphere in the ballroom, transforming Rosa from an object of curiosity or disapproval into a person whose dignity commanded respect regardless of anyone's feelings about her relationship with David. The wedding of David Sterling and Rosa Martinez took place 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony that was attended by a carefully selected group of family members and friends who had chosen to support their relationship despite the social complications it presented. The event was held in the garden of the Sterling estate, with decorations that emphasized natural beauty rather than expensive displays of wealth. Victoria Sterling had initially threatened to boycott the wedding, but had eventually chosen to attend after recognizing that her son's happiness and her future grandchild's welfare were more important than maintaining the social conventions that had governed her life for decades. Her acceptance of Rosa had been gradual and sometimes reluctant, but it had grown into genuine affection as she came to understand the strength and intelligence that David had fallen in love with. The charity gala incident had become legendary in the city's social circles, but not in the way that anyone had expected. Rather than damaging the Sterling family's reputation, David's public defense of Rosa had enhanced their standing among people who valued character over convention and had inspired other wealthy families to examine their own attitudes toward class and social inclusion. Margaret Walsh had been quietly terminated from her position at the hotel, not because of her treatment of Rosa specifically, but because the incident had revealed a pattern of discriminatory behavior toward working-class employees that the hotel's management could no longer ignore once it had been exposed so publicly. The Sterling Foundation had established a new program providing microloans and business development services to immigrant entrepreneurs, with Rosa serving as a program advisor who helped design services that addressed the real challenges faced by people starting businesses without access to traditional funding sources. Rosa's cleaning service had become one of the most successful small businesses in the city, employing more than 30 women and providing wages and working conditions that were significantly better than industry standards. The business had attracted attention from social entrepreneurs and impact investors who were interested in supporting enterprises that combined profitability with social responsibility. David had used his position in the family's charitable foundation to focus on issues related to immigration, workers' rights, and economic opportunity for underserved communities. His work had given him insights into systemic problems that he had never understood from his position of privilege, and had helped him become an advocate for policies that addressed inequality rather than simply providing charity to those affected by it. The baby, a daughter they named Elena, had been born healthy and beautiful, surrounded by love from both sides of her family despite the vast differences in their backgrounds and circumstances. Her birth had helped bridge some of the cultural and social gaps that had initially seemed insurmountable, as both grandmothers had discovered that their shared joy in the child was more powerful than their differences about appropriate social boundaries. Rosa had completed her business degree while managing her company and raising her daughter, demonstrating the kind of determination and capability that had originally attracted David to her. Her success had helped some members of high society understand that intelligence and ambition weren't limited to people who had been born into privilege. The incident at the charity gala had also led to changes in how social events were managed, with event planners and hospitality companies implementing training programs that emphasized respectful treatment of all workers regardless of their apparent social status. The changes had been driven partly by ethical considerations and partly by practical recognition that public humiliation of employees could create public relations disasters for clients and venues. Years later, when Elena was old enough to understand the story of her parents' meeting and marriage, Rosa and David would tell her about the night when love had triumphed over social convention, when standing up for what was right had mattered more than maintaining comfortable relationships with people who valued status over character. They would explain to her that true wealth wasn't measured by money or social position, but by the love you shared with others and the positive impact you had on your community. They would teach her that every person deserved respect and dignity regardless of their circumstances, and that she had a responsibility to use whatever advantages she inherited to help others rather than to maintain barriers that kept people apart. The charity gala incident had been painful and humiliating at the time, but it had also been transformative, forcing everyone involved to confront their assumptions about worth, dignity, and appropriate relationships between people of different social classes. It had demonstrated that love could overcome social barriers when people were willing to choose principle over convention, and that public stands for justice could inspire others to examine their own attitudes and behaviors. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with someone refusing to accept that humiliation and discrimination are acceptable simply because they're directed at people who seem powerless to fight back. Rosa and David's story reminds us that dignity isn't determined by job titles or bank accounts, that love doesn't recognize social boundaries, and that the courage to defend what's right can transform not just individual lives but entire communities. The measure of a person's worth isn't found in their circumstances but in their character, and the measure of a society isn't found in how it treats its most privileged members but in how it treats those who are most vulnerable to discrimination and abuse. Because sometimes the person being dragged out the door is carrying the future, and sometimes the greatest love stories begin with someone having the courage to say, "That's my baby," regardless of what the world might think. This story was brought to you by Heroes Unheard. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Tell us in the comments what they meant to you and how you remember them. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We'll see you in the next one.